In this video, we're going to take a floor model and we're going to build a wood material in the VRay rendering engine and apply it and scale it to this floor. So I have here a scene, very simple partial architectural scene modeled. I'm going to work just with the floor, so I'm going to go to my visibility tab and let's say isolate objects, which is going to hide everything but that object. And then I'm going to open up my VRay compact menu, go to my asset editor, to my materials tab, and make a new generic material, which is a very, very flexible format for a material. I'm going to call this wood floor. I'm going to assign it to my selection. And opening up the right-hand side of my asset editor, I see the description of that material, the recipe of that material. And the first category I need to adjust is my diffuse. That's the primary color of my floor, and it's set to the default gray value. In my case, I have a texture already downloaded for my wood floor that I want to use. So I'm going to click on this texture slot, this checkerboard, and I'm going to pick type bitmap, which is good for any image map, digital image file that I have, and I'm going to browse to a location where I have a seamless cherry wood kind of parquet texture downloaded, and I'm going to click open. And what I see now in my asset editor is just the parquet, but my material now has a arrow down, and I can toggle back and forth between my floor, the entire material, and my bitmap, where I have controls specifically for that bitmap. My wood floor looks a little flat, and I'm judging that just based off of this preview shape here. I'm going to go to reflection and increase my reflection color from black to white. That is a very sharp reflection, so I'm going to pull back my glossiness from 1 maybe to 0.8, which will make it a softer, less polished floor, and leave on my Fresnel effect, which is going to limit the amount of reflection. Very, very important to have that on for most of your non-glass, non-metal materials. So most stones and woods and plastics would have Fresnel turned on. Now, I could render in my viewport in order to see the scale of this texture, but if I'm working in VRay, I can also set my viewport shading style to be rendered. And what that does is it shows me my texture map on my floor. And I've got a problem here. This is completely out of scale for my floor. It is stretched, it is enormous. I want my floor to be more realistic in scale. And I do that through the object itself, meaning the floor geometry is where I'm going to make this change. So let's select that floor geometry, and in our properties, go to our texture mapping, and we are going to get rid of the mapping that we have, meaning the way that textures are projected onto my object, and we are going to use a new mapping. So I'm going to choose, of all of these black and white checkerboard types of mapping, boxes, spheres, cylinders, the one that makes the most sense for a floor, in this case, this floor, is a planar mapping. I only need to see the top plane of this object. So I'm going to click Apply Planar Mapping, and in my command line, I'm asked to select the first corner of the plane. I'm going to choose the default bounding box, which will set it to my object. I'm asked for a coordinate system. I'm going to hit enter to accept that. And I'm asked for a mechanism for UVs, and I'm going to hit enter again. So I'm accepting all of the default settings. And what I get now with my object selected in my texture mapping is I can see I have planar mapping, and I have a position, and very importantly, a size in X, Y, and Z. 1182 by 642 by 1. And I can see that my texture is stretched in the long direction, and that's because the default settings is stretching it to fit this object. Let's set these two numbers to be the same value. Let's set this to 642. So now my X and Y, my major dimensions on this floor, are set to the same scale. My floor is still too large for my taste, but it is at least square now. So let's set these numbers to something smaller. Let's go 200, 200. And now, because those numbers are the same, I have square units. And I think my floor is getting close to what I want. I'm going to go 175, 175. And I've saved myself some rendering by using the rendered viewport type to be able to see the scale of this texture. Let's go back to shading. Let's type in show to show our objects. I believe in my scene, if I look at my named views, I have from another video a test viewport direction, and I should have some lighting coming in this scene and some indirect lighting at this column. Let's hit render and see what we get. Well, I am certainly seeing wood floor. I'm seeing sunlight coming in. I'm seeing highlights from the outside sky reflected on that floor. And if I zoom in, it's hard to see some details. So let's go to our VRay asset editor, go to our settings. I'm going to set my render output size to something larger, let's say 2400 pixels. It's going to take longer to render, but I'll see more details. I'm going to click render. And I'm also going to turn on in my viewport something called region render, which allows me to draw. Let me stop that. Region render allows me to draw or resize a region. So I'm only going to be rendering that region. So now if I start a new render, it's limited to that part of my scene. So it goes much faster and I'm able to see more detail in my scene. So as I scroll in, yeah, that's something. Starting to see some sense of my texture. However, I would like more bumpiness. It seems very flat and continuous, almost like it's painted on. So let's go back to the material and not in diffuse, not in reflection, but under bump, let's add a bump map. Let's go to our texture slot for our bump map. And I'm actually going to use the same image as my color. This is a little sloppy, but in a pinch, it's going to work. It's going to take lighter values of that texture and say those are pushed further away from the floor, and darker values, and they're going to be recessed, so or not pushed away. So it's not a bad starting point for my bump, and I'm going to say 0.2, and let's render again. And this should create the illusion of more texture on my floor. Sometimes it's going to be too much, and I would scale back the amount value. It's very subjective. I'm seeing grain on the floor. It's a little heavy-handed for me, so I'm going to go to 0.125 for my amount, and I'm going to render. And now I'm getting reflection, I'm getting color, I'm getting a little bit of a sense of texture on my floor. And I've scaled it using my planar mapping in my object's UV mapping. So not a bad starting point for making a wood floor in VRay for Rhino.